here of the SCG Invitational. And you kind of mentioned Oliver's plan, just to be on the creature removal plan. Once he gets all of Brad's creatures, it's going to be hard for Brad to replenish threats. He doesn't really have card selection.
Right, he just kind of hangs out, starts drawing redundant Teamer Battle Rages. He can just kind of end up with an unfunctional mishmash of a hand.
Brad's going to start with Mishra's Bauble. He'll play it. Now that card, sacrifice to look at the top card of target player's library, then draw a card at the beginning of the next upkeep. Brad will look at the top card of his own deck, then decide maybe it's not what he wants, and he's going to go ahead and crack Windswept Heath.
A little cheeky play with a fetch land. Often you will target your opponent to get some extra information. With access to a fetch land, you could say, I want to or I don't want to draw this top card.
Card is Mishra's. Card is Godless Shrine, the land for Nelson. Just 5 mana producing lands in the Death Shadow deck, all of them Ravnica Duels, as Brad's first creature is a copy of Steplings. He opted for Steplings over a turn 1 Thoughtseize in his hand. And now obviously not knowing Oliver's deck, that speaks to how this deck strategy is, I'd assume?
Yeah, particularly with Steplings, there's a lot of pressure to keep hitting land drops. The deck doesn't play a ton of lands, so if you lead on Thoughtseize, that can put you back on tempo and just overall power for your Steplings.
Big response for Tomajko. Blackcleave Cliffs into Lightning Bolt takes care of the Steplings as we go to Brad's second turn. Brad had Mutagenic Growth, it looks like, in his hand, but as the 0-1, the spell wouldn't actually save it from Lightning Bolt.
Yep, that's going to be the one creature out of Brad's build that's going to bite it there. I suppose a Wild Nacatl without the requisite lands in play would also be not large enough to survive.
Yeah, I guess frequently this deck does Overgrown Tomb into Wild Nacatl.
Yeah, it's the only deck that does that.
All right, we're back to Brad Nelson. On the second turn, he will go ahead and use a fetch land for a Ravnica Duel again, so down to 14 to find Stomping Ground. Now does have all 4 of his colors online.
Which can sometimes be a struggle for this deck.
Monastery Swift Spear, and now we go to work. It's going to be a copy of Gitaxian Probe. So we get our first look over at Tomajko's hand. He has 2 more lands, it looks like. He has both Bloodstained Mire and Blackcleave Cliffs, and copies of Huntmaster of the Fells, Kalitas, and Tarmogoyf. Now Brad does have a copy of Thoughtseize in his hand, so he may go back and take one of those cards. Swift Spear is currently a 2-3. And it looks like that last card in Oliver's hand was actually a copy of Abrupt Decay. I'm liking where Oliver's sitting here. Bolt into Decay.
Right, exactly. A lot of hands out of the Death Shadow deck are just going to be colded just right out of the gates with those 2 removal spells. And the more creatures that Brad is presenting, that means he has less, there's lower odds that he actually has the Teamer Battle Rage, the Become Immense combo. Also important to keep in mind, Brad's already done 12 damage to himself. Get a Tarmogoyf on the table for Tomajko. Doesn't take a lot of hits to clock Brad here.
Yeah, well, he's at 12, and now to be at 10. So he does cast the Thoughtseize. So we take a look again. His options are Tarmogoyf, Abrupt Decay. I'd have to think he's taking one of those over the 2 4-drops, Kalitas and Huntmaster.
Right, if Brad is winning this game, it's going to be before those 4 drops matter.
All right, an attack for 3 sends Tomajko to 17.
There's also a ton of redundancy in having 2 4-drops in this matchup. If Tomajko's winning the game, he's doing it with exactly one of those. He doesn't need the follow-up.
Big draw for Tomajko this turn. His draw was a copy of Grim Lavamancer. Now keep in mind, this Lavamancer, the Huntmaster, and Kalitas are all 1-ofs in the main deck of Oliver Tomajko.
Presumably there's a couple 4-ofs or even 2-ofs he'd rather be drawing. If he could turn one of those cards into a Terminate, I'm sure he'd be very happy with that. 2 copies of Terminate in the main deck.
And here is Tarmogoyf for Tomajko. It does not come without cost. He did have to use Bloodstained Mire into Overgrown Tomb, putting himself to 14. But what a Tarmogoyf it is right now. We have land and instant on Tomajko's side. And on Brad's, a lot more. We have sorcery, creature, and actually have artifact in the yard, too, from that bauble.
Just another drawback to Mishra's Bauble.
You're pumping your opponent's Tarmogoyfs. Brad will go to 8 to cast another Gitaxian Probe. He now sees the Grim Lavamancer that Tomajko has drawn. So we have land 3 and a Lavamancer and a pair of 4-drops.
Funny thing about the Death Shadow deck, Brad can never pay mana for his Gitaxian Probes. Those are always going to be coming at the cost of 2 life. Just a bunch of non-blue dual lands in the deck.
Yeah, he has 5 dual lands. I suppose there are 6 dual lands without blue. Brad's playing 5 of them. And find it. Yeah, he has all the non-blue shock lands except no Temple Garden.
Brad just used a bobble to check out Tomajko's top card. I didn't get a peek at what it was, but either way, pumps the Swift Spear a little bit more here.
Yeah, so Swift Spear up to 3/4. Tomajko's going to block it with the Tarmogoyf. Mutagenic growth from Brad. Puts Brad down to 6. It does make the Swift Spear up to 6/7, so Swift Spear will eat the Tarmogoyf. Now, Brad didn't use green mana to cast that.
Yeah, you know, he was at 8. That would make a potential Death Shadow of 5/5. Now we're in a range where it would take more than 2 Lightning Bolts to kill a Death Shadow.
And speaking of Death Shadow, there it is. Brad will pass. This is a 7/7.
He's also spotted some rather large creatures in Tomajko's hand, so just having that extra punch against the Huntmaster of the Fells would be significant as well.
For Tomajko, his drawn card was Blackcleave Cliffs. He casts Grim Lavamancer, and we're back to Brad Nelson. As early as next turn, Tomajko will get to start making those 4-drops.
Yep. And Grim Lavamancer is not quite equipped to deal with Death Shadow.
Yeah, I suppose there was a chance that we would have seen the Lavamancer go after the Swift Spear, but at this point you think it might just be a chump blocker?
Yeah, very likely, especially if Tomajko's play next turn is just going to be a 4-drop. You can't activate the Lavamancer on that turn.
Brad plays Arid Mesa and then attacks. See if Tomajko blocks. Brad, there's this symmetric effect where if he doesn't block, Brad can start dealing damage to himself that also deals damage to Oliver.
Right. Has to be a little bit careful of the Grim Lavamancer just killing him, though a fetch shock here would still leave him at 3, so a little above that.
He will fetch to go to 5, and it looks like goes down to 3. Now Brad, because of that Blackcleave Cliffs, he knows Oliver's whole hand, and knows that Oliver didn't have a Lightning Bolt when he went down to that life total.
Yep.
So he safely does that. Oliver no blocks, and Brad plays a Mutagenic Growth for lethal, and he takes game 1.
Yeah, and that's exactly what he needs to do. That Thoughtseize was extremely clutch here in the matchup, taking that Abrupt Decay from Tomajko. So Brad was able to just get ahead, cast a total of 3 threats, and was only fought by 1 answer there. So was able to pretty cleanly dispatch Jund.
And there's so much unexpected damage. Tomajko didn't block on that last turn, thinking it's unlikely that he's dead from 14.
Yeah, probably more likely was hoping to get better value out of the Grim Lavamancer, and if he's dead there, it's unlikely he can do too much about that game anyway. His block already isn't profitable. He would be chump blocking.
Right. So we'll go to the sideboard. Let's start on Tomajko's Jund side. Jund, a deck that usually gets better outside of the sideboard. So we have 4 Kitchen Finks, a pair of Ancient Grudges, a pair of Nile Spellbombs, and then a lot of one-ofs. Chandra Pyromaster, Kolaghan's Command, Shatterstorm, Jund Charm, Anger of the Gods, Duress, and Thoughtseize.
Yeah, so for this matchup, Tomajko is going to want to try to make his deck as lean as possible. Kitchen Finks I kind of like, even though it deviates slightly from that plan. It still gains life, can block and come back. Duress and Thoughtseize will help him combat more efficiently. I like these cards just to get the mana curve a little bit leaner. Turn 1 Inquisition or a Thoughtseize here could just break this game wide open. So on the play here, there's a lot of value for Thoughtseize. So I imagine Duress and Thoughtseize should be coming in some number of Kitchen Finks as well. Presumably get some of these 4-drops out of the deck. Don't need to be messing around with anything like that. The main deck Kolaghan's Command's coming out as well. So possibly a small number of Kitchen Finks, but definitely some discard spells.
For Brad, we have, a Forest Nile Spellbomb, Grafdigger's Cage, Path to Exiles. What do we like about this?
Just the extra discard spells, these 2 Inquisition, a Kozilek to deal with the removal spells out of Tomajko. Some argument for Path to Exile to deal with the Tarmogoyf out of the Jund's deck, but primarily we're looking at these discard spells.
All right. Players are going to get ready for game number 2 here. Now that we are at the end of Season 2 here with our Invitational, Star City Games is going to announce our next schedule. That's Season 3. We have a whole slew of opens leading to our Season 3 Invitational that happens in December. So the first Invitational starts, the first open starts this weekend in New Jersey. So That is for the players not in the Invitational. It starts tomorrow. After that, we're going to go ahead and start our tour of the country, and we make our way in September to Richmond for Standard Open. Following up with mid-September, we have our first Modern Open of the season in Orlando, and then it's back to Standard for Indianapolis. We'll take a break in mid-October for the regional championships before going back to Modern in Milwaukee. Continuing on, we have events in Baltimore, Columbus, and Knoxville. Baltimore, of course, the Legacy Open of the season. That's November 5th and 6th for those of you Legacy players. Until at the beginning of December 2nd through 4th, we have our Invitational weekend in Atlanta. Once again, a mix of Standard and Modern. And for participating, just as we have had this season, we have 3 new exclusive playmats given away depending on the event you enter. This is for entry into any Open or Classic. So for Standard, we have Dark Salvation, the playmat. That's the zombie-making sorcery that you see here featuring Liliana. Black XX, I've seen that thing do a ton of work. Even saw some play at the Pro Tour in Sam Black's deck. For showing up in Modern, we haven't had a robot card yet, so we figured we'd go over to Steel Overseer, the M11 card, now a linchpin of the Affinity strategy. And for Legacy, it is everyone's favorite, Sensei's Divining Top, part of the Miracles deck. So each of these available on entry to any Open or Classic. So you can get these for all of Season 2. That starts this weekend in New Jersey, running all the way through December 2nd's Atlanta Open.
Really cool playmats. I like the art on all of those is just great.
Game 2, Oliver has kept on 6, and he will start the game off on Thoughtseize. Brad's hand, 2 lands, 3 spells, 2 creatures. We see Street Wraith, 2 mutagenic growths, Steplinks, Tarmogoyf, and a pair of lands.
Okay, and Tarmogoyf is a sideboard card here. It's something that Brad is bringing in because it's generally going to be invulnerable to a lightning bolt. Also just ups his threat density. Yeah,
we usually see some numbers of Tarmogoyf, or sometimes a Thrun in the sideboard for the same reason.
He's got a Ranger of Eos, which presumably is somewhere in his deck right now.
Yeah, that seems great here. And Tomajko will select the Tarmogoyf. Wants nothing to do with that. So we go back over to Brad Nelson. Draws a replacement creature, though. It's a copy of Monastery Swiftspear.
Yeah, Brad's hand is looking fairly solid here. Depends how many removal spells Tomajko's got. Brad's not going to have much issue deploying threats.
So a little Street Wraith action. Brad goes down to 18. And we'll start with a Sacred Foundry. See which 1-drop he wants to go with, and it's Steplinks.
And that's generally going to be what you lead on. Again, the deck's not going to make a ton of land drops, so get the Steplinks down where they can attack on the most possible turns. Also, frequently you're going to sequence your non-haste creature before your haste creature.
Pressure's on for Tomajko. Remember, he was on a 6-card hand. Looks like he will play Blood Crypt into Lightning Bolt, so it goes down to 16 to do it, but keeps the board clear, unless Brad wants to spend both of those mutagenic growths.
That would be a very aggressive use there, in particular with the Monastery Swiftspear in hand. I'd be surprised to see Brad do that.
Yeah, it looks like he's on the same wavelength. Steplinks goes to the graveyard. Now, as far as Tomajko goes, that was Brad's last creature, but when Brad lets it die here, you'd have to think maybe it's not.
Yeah, there's just not a very high chance that he's fighting over that. Of course, Tomajko has Mulligan, so Brad could maybe be saving those for a better spot, even if it was the only creature. Of course, we know that's not the case.
Here is Monastery Swiftspear. Brad will cast a Gitaxian Probe going to 11 and sees a trio of lands in Tomajko's hand.
This is looking pretty good for Brad now.
We'd have to think for Tomajko on a 6-card hand, Thoughtseize Lightning Bolt 4 lands is likely a keep, but certainly his Scry and Draw Step not cooperating.
Yeah, going below 5 there is not ideal. He knows with 2 interactive spells in a deck that can kind of fumble, isn't known for being the most consistent deck in Modern. That can beat a healthy amount of Brad's hands, and until Brad do that Swiftspear, Tomajko maybe felt ahead for a minute here.
So just the 2 damage, Tomajko goes to 14. Now I gotta see, can he make a Liliana, something else strong here? It'll be a Raging Ravine and a pass, and now the floodgates are starting to open. We'll see how much damage Brad wants to dump into this next turn. A pair of mutagenic growths hiding out in Brad's hand. Tomajko's at 14. Brad has 5 cards, so there's more to work with. But it looks like the attack will be for 1, and just for 1.
Yeah, Brad knows Tomajko's got nothing going on except for a top deck. If he gets greedy and goes for these mutagenic growths, which are shy of lethal, and just gets hit by a Terminate here, that would be a lot of value loss for no reason.
Well, speaking of a Terminate, Tomajko finally does draw a spell, which is Terminate, but he'll play his 4th land and pass. Looks like his remaining cards are lands 5 and 6, plus that Terminate.
Yeah, feign some weakness here. Maybe Brad goes for it on the following turn.
Well, Brad didn't go for it last turn. I mean, we don't know how much Brad has going on, I guess.
One thing about Death Shadow, when you compare it to Infect, usually your Terminate is going to hit no matter what. There's no Vines of the Vastwood. I'm not seeing any copies of Apostle's Blessing. So
right.
You have a high degree of certainty that your Terminate's going to resolve. And just taking 1 on the chin is a fine cost to maybe get a little bit more value later.
Back to Brad Nelson. He has had control of this game right now, but as both players trade land drops, Oliver is 1 top deck away from ending that. Swing is 1 with Swift Spear.
Yeah, and if Brad had a hand that could close the game very quickly, then this wouldn't have mattered, though one of his lands is Raging Ravine, so that creature land is not for nothing.
Yeah, I think it's unusual that Jundak makes it all the way to Raging Ravine in this matchup. But that's where we are.
With nothing else going on anyway.
Right. And it looks like Brad will delve away his yard for a copy of Hooting Mandrills, leaving 2 spells and a Godless Shrine up. So now he has a real threat on the board. And yeah, Tomajko forced to terminate the Mandrills.
Yeah, that was a really good pickup for Brad. I like Tomajko just cleaning it up there. There's a good number of draws in his deck that are pretty mana hungry. He's only getting up to 5 lands. If he picks up something like Kalitas on the following turn, sit waiting on the Terminate could just spell death. He is already down to 11.
What do you make of Brad leaving up the Godless Shrine? He delved, leaving 2 cards in his graveyard. Now he does have other delve spells like Become Immense.
Maybe just representing something. Sometimes it could mean he does have Path to Exile on the sideboard. He's representing that spell in some respects. Could be trying to sell on that, say if Tomajko is thinking about blocking with this Raging Ravine.
Tomajko's draw was Thoughtseize, but it looks like he's just going to crack a Verdant Catacombs and maybe to attack with the Ravine. That seems hugely dangerous.
Very aggressive.
He'd have to assume he's going to die on the swing back if he makes that play. But that's the play. He'll activate Ravine and attack.
If he's making this play, he's thinking that Brad can't kill him. He knows about 2 mutagenic growths. Only 1 of them can be cast for mana.
And it looks like we have Dismember from Brad. He'll go down to 6 to kill the Raging Ravine, untap. And with this kind of speed, you've got to be concerned if you're Oliver Tomajko that Brad just has you dead on the crackback.
Yeah, with 2 growths, the Swift Spear would already be 7. Doesn't take much more to make that lethal.
So here's Inquisition of Kozilek. That will take the Thoughtseize from Tomajko's hand, leaving him with just a Verdant Catacombs. Swift Spear goes up to a 2/3. Suppose Brad can get it up to 8 power with these 2 mutagenic growths and get Tomajko down to 2.
Given that Tomajko's spell was Thoughtseize, I do like that line with the Raging Ravine. It's fairly low percentage to actually pay off, but he might be able to kill Brad, where just by Thoughtseizing, he's not going to gain much ground in this battle.
If he tried to block with it, that's almost certainly not going to work. And in fact, the Dismember would add a prowess to the Swift Spear.
Right, or even just a mutagenic growth to get him through if he just wanted to engage in combat and sit on the Dismember. It was bad in a lot of ways.
All right, we'll see. Some interesting questions. Will Brad spend the mutagenic growths? Will he spend green mana on them?
If I'm Nelson, I definitely don't want to go to 3 or lower here.
Yeah, you don't want to be a top deck to Lightning Bolt from being dead.
Yeah, unless he has lethal right now, presumably he'll hang out at 4 or higher.
He's going to attack with Swift Spear. He casts Wild Nacatl. Now we're going to see if he chooses to go for one of those 2 mutagenic growths. They're the last 2 cards in his hand.
Casting 1 seems totally safe here, but Brad's going to hang on to it. Next turn he'll have 2 creatures, so we'll have a good target for it next turn for sure. It's not getting worse in his hand.
Yeah, he's going to go even safer. Cats it. And Tomajko needed to hit his draw there, but it looks like he hit a basic land. Yeah, just a swamp. So he is dead currently to Brad's board. You see, he plays the fetch land so that Brad doesn't know that.
Yeah, playing sharp here. Maybe you can get Brad to not go for lethal and draw something, though of course he's drawing pretty slim. There's nothing like a damnation in Tomajko's 75. So facing down 2 creatures with nothing in hand is quite the problematic position.
Brad would need to cast both mutagenic growths to make this lethal. He will attack for 4. Looks like he will cast one of the mutagenic growths, targeting Monastery Swiftspear. That will make it a 4-power creature. So this is a 7-point attack. And now Brad gets to decide if he wants to try to win this turn or not. He will go for it, paying 2 life, and that will work. Game and match go to Brad Nelson, and he improves to 3-0.
And for Tomajko's opening hand there, it was solid, but it was definitely a little bit shy of what he wanted. Got down to 6, just had Thoughtseize Lightning Bolt. Not enough juice to interact with every threat that Nelson was able to produce there.